My name is Matthew Barnes. I am a 2010 graduate at the International Yacht Restoration School. Tonight I'll be talking about the Mayflower II restoration and my role there and that overall project. Coming to you here in my shop in Madison, Connecticut. Currently I am owner of Lead Boat Works. As of July 2019, I left Mystic Seaport Museum to pursue my own business. Firstly is the Mayflower II, which you see here on the screen. She is a full-scale reproduction of the original Mayflower that brought the Pilgrims over in 1620. She was built in 1954 through 1957 in Bixham, England. She was gifted to the United States for our help in World War II. Sailed unaided from England here to Plymouth, Massachusetts, where she currently resides and is owned by Plimoth Plantation. She took roughly 2 months to sail over by a full crew of about 32. She's overall 242 tons, 106 feet, give or take, on the waterline, and about 25 feet overall in berth. Like I said, she's currently owned by Plimoth Plantation, Massachusetts, and this whole project had been a collaboration between Plimoth Plantation and Mystic Seaport. Here's a few shots of her being built. On the left-hand side, you see her upper deck framed out, and on the right-hand side, you see her entering New York Harbor. She came to huge fanfare when she was delivered over here. Close to 1 million people came out to see her through her trip as she sailed through to New York and then back up to Plymouth. Here's a couple more pictures of some of the people involved. William Avery Baker in the top right. He is the designer of the Mayflower II. And you see here workers called chippies back then in England working on her framework, and then her in the water, with the frame exposed. She's so tall that they had to launch her first to really finish the work. So they worked halfway through, launched her, and then put her in the water, and then finished the top sides. Seen here is then Senator Nixon on deck. And then you see her in Plymouth Harbor to the huge fanfare that she came into. Very well resided as she came in. Right here you see work getting done in 1956, and then on the next slide you see us working in 2017. A lot of the hand tools we used were basically the same methods as I used in 1956. At Mystic Seaport we really try and emphasize the use of hand tools and recreate projects as they were done originally. And in 2017, you see the finished out frames here, all finished out. Here's another shot of the interior hold with what's called sealing or stringer clamps that go through and basically connect all the frames down below. So this project itself was broken up into 3 stages. She first came to us in 2015 during that winter, and what we first did was haul her out and really do a survey and assessment. You see here on these next 2 slides, she's hauled out in the ship lift at Mystic Seaport and us diving to bring her out. It was quite a cold day, not a very fun dive at all. Here you see 1 month later, she's out of the water, snow on the ground. We didn't cover her that first year. We put a makeshift cover on her, and really seeing that most work was inside, we really didn't really need to cover the entire ship like we did in 2016. As you see here, our first step was really to take out all the existing ballast inside the hold. Originally, she was ballasted with steel railroad track, put into compartments, which essentially by the time we got to it had rusted completely. I think we pulled almost 20 tons of just scale out of her, steel, scale, rust, just excess stuff that came out of it. And on top of that steel beam was pavers to look authentic. I think we pulled almost 2,000 pavers out by hand. Everything was done by hand and cranes, so we would load everything onto pallets and bags in the center of the hold, and then raise everything up with a crane through the main hatch. Very laborious, just making a chain line of hand over hand. It was pretty rough. You see here is an up-close shot of the rust and the scale itself and those old railroad tracks. And then here, the next slide is cobble. Put on top. And this is her out of the water as the spring came in. That first year, we did survey and assessment. We pulled a few planks out. We redid the ballasting and that kind of stuff, and really just set ourselves up for the next 2 years. Painting, gave her a fresh coat, did the bottom, and basically sent her back to Plymouth. So she can be there for the summer. She's a huge revenue booster for Plymouth Plantation. So one of our biggest obstacles was getting her here, having her exposed to the public, so people can still see her, and getting her back on time, which is always a necessity. So second stage, you see her coming through the bridge here in Mystic. we worked on what's called the half deck. If you look in the breakdown of the ship, the half deck is sort of, which is the after part of the main deck. And so we took it upon ourselves to replace all those interior framings. We kept her in the water that year. We pulled out all the old knees in that hatchway and replaced everything, as is. And as we go through these slides, you'll see some of the work that we did through and through of the clamps and replacing that kind of stuff. So some of the patterning process. So like I said, everything was done by hand back in 1956. So we really tried to replicate that to give her that authentic look. So these next couple slides is sort of the process of how we made one of these deck beams, taking a pattern, coming in, laying down the pattern, marking it out, and then going through the process of chopping it out with an axe and then finishing it up with an adze. Here's a slide that shows some of the tools that we actually used. You can see my axe collection here. I have a bit of an addiction with hand tools and adzes, especially an axe. I don't know what's wrong with me. So you see here, this is sort of the process of repairing that half deck, like I said. All joinery was done by hand. You can see kind of some of the hand hewing of the new oak that we put into this area here. And you can see the cover we put on her. So we kept her in the water, like I said earlier, and then we put a temporary cover over the top, shrink wrap and pipe wrapping. You see here we are dropping a frame in. This section of the restoration and the process of doing this from the inside out was another difficult part. Logistics on this project was always a concern for everyone involved. And so making this work, doing the most efficient amount of work done in the time period was very important. So you see here, we still have all the planking on, so dropping these new frames in was a little bit difficult, but we seemed to manage. In that first year, we only had a crew of about 5 guys really working on it. And when we switch to 2016, we'll actually be up to our high point of about 35 shipwrights. So this initial stage was really, the birth of this whole entire project. As you see here, some of the guys working on, you can see some of the hand hewing going on and just some of the work that was involved. This next slide shows some of the hand joinery. These guys really took pride in their work. Incredible crew throughout, working through this whole entire project. Basically young guys coming in. We had some senior management, including myself, Walter Ansel, senior shipwright, Quentin Snedeker is the director of the Seaport Waterfront, and then Whit Perry, who essentially captained the ship and was the man in charge for Plymouth. And together, we made up the management team of this project. So the types of wood that we put into this boat range greatly. Generally, white oak is the specific wood we use for the planking, framework, structural components, and that kind of stuff. We did all milling on site. So Mystic has a saying, it's called tree to sea. So essentially we get in logs and we go from there. We do our own milling on site, sticker, complete everything together, make the patterns, come out, find the log, and then make the piece from there. It's a really good process when you're doing a ship like this because you get to select what you have and you're in control of every aspect. Shots here, you can see these crooked pieces we have. It's very essential for making the structural components is getting a natural curve and using the natural piece itself. Other type of wood, which is very good that we use, is called live oak. Live oak's been used for centuries in the United States to build ships of this size and magnitude. It grows generally down from Virginia south, prominently in South Carolina, Louisiana, which is where we got most of our wood from. We actually spent, Whit Perry and myself, who you see in the corner of this slide, next to this giant live oak tree. We spent 2 weeks in March of 2016. We went down and we use a small forest to restore ships like this. And so we try to be as conservative as possible. And so we were contacted by a landowner who was having a stretch of land taken through eminent domain by a power company. So we came in and he donated 13 live oak trees that we can come in and select. So we oversaw the process of felling, and then we ran in with our spray paint in between these machines that would mulch trees around them, told them what to cut, they put it aside, and then we hauled it all back. We ended up getting about 5 truckloads of material for this project from that one piece of land, which was great for us. And it's great working with the owners. And you can see here in these slides that these shapes coming from the live oak trees are essential for all the framework. They're all the crooks and the frames and the knees and all that kind of stuff that you really want to have all the grain in line. And live oak is really the only way to do it. A couple pictures here, and here's a time lapse of the tree falling itself. Pretty epic to see these things go down. Sad, but also very exciting. And here you see loading up the truck. We filled, like I said, we filled about 5 of these truckloads up with material. And just a few more shots of loading up the truck and some of these enormous trunk pieces that basically went into the stem, which, the stem was broken up into 5 different sections. One single section of that was about 2,000 pounds. So you can really get a feel for the size of these trees. And then they used dump bodies to actually unload all this stuff on site, which is very scary to see. Really a time where I took a step back. Like I said, so we do everything tree to sea. Milling is a huge part of the process, and we do that all in-house. You can see how we go from here to these logs to this beautiful joinery and shipwork here. We have a Lucas mill, which is essentially a chainsaw mill, it's a lawnmower essentially with a 6-foot chainsaw blade put on, and you push it through the piece itself with 2 people. And here's a video of a couple other of our milling process. Here's the time lapse of the Lucas mill in work, cutting through this live oak log. And then as we go forward, we have a circular sawmill also. And this is more of a manual type. This is basically for ripping straight edges, doing planking and things like that. We also used a wood miser, which is a very thin kerf bandsaw blade, which was awesome because it was remote operated and you could stand back and basically do a beautiful job without ever having to really touch anything. So the third stage was really the whole, the largest part of this project. It consisted of 36 months of work, which actually pushed out to be about 40. And it really let us get into all the major framework repair, replacing basically almost 600 futtocks. So if I say futtocks, if you think of a frame, complete frame of the ship, each individual part of that frame is a futtock. They're called double sawn frames, so they overlap each other to build up that entire structure. Some of the other work we did is 100% of the planking got replaced. New inner and outer stem, new stern posts, completely new transom. Overall, we really did about 70% of the entire boat. Probably closer to 75 if you put it all together, including rigging, new sails, all this kind of stuff. So it was a very major overhaul. Everybody says 1956, isn't really that old, but if you think of a ship like this and all the weight and all the stress that's built on it, it's actually a long time for these, boats. Ships of this size built during this time period were basically used for about 20 years, and that was actually a shelf life. Mayflower itself was about 25 years old when it sailed over from England in 1620. They were essentially U-Hauls. They came with a captain and a crew. You would hire them to do whatever you really need to do. So she was hired to come across. So she was brought here by a tug each time, since she couldn't sail due to her condition. 2020, she said, plans to sail back, which is the ultimate goal. But she was brought down by Jaguar out of New Bedford. They were great. They did all their transit for them, tied right up. Took about 3 days to get down from Plymouth. So we replaced the ballast from the first stage with about 100 tons of lead. So that we put in 2015 had to come out in 2016. It's what I would call team building when I told the guys that's what we had to do that day. So it's each of these little blocks of lead is about 80 pounds. So if you think of that, you can see the amount of pallets we had here is a lot of handwork. And all same way, it was all dropped in from a crane. Luckily in 2016, we could cut a hole in the ship and then feed everything out from the side. And under that lead, she had about 22 tons of concrete poured between the frames, which is a very common practice. What it does is adds a little ballast, structurally supports some of the framework, and it also allows all the water to stay above the keel. Very commonly used in fishing boats now. Here's another shot of all the lead on top of that concrete. So this process was very laborious also. We had just hired all these new guys. I told them, yeah, this is going to be great. You're going to be a shipwright. You're going to be building ships. Now here's a jackhammer. Take all this concrete out of there. But luckily the guys were great, and so we took about 2 weeks to jackhammer and shovel all this concrete out between the frames basically in 5-gallon buckets. And you can see here now the frame's all cleaned out and some of the extensive damage we found underneath that concrete. As you go through these next slides, it's going to show some of the exterior damage of what we were really facing now that we got into it. Extensive rot. She was fastened with iron. You get what's called iron sickness, is where the iron itself oxidates and spreads and expands and contracts around the wood and then deteriorates, leaving open voids for oxygen, fresh water, and all this to get in to really start to eat away at the ship. And then the whole breakdown of the process, everything was documented as we took pieces apart with the ascension that it's going to come back through and we're going to be put back on it. And here you see the cover we put on the ship itself. So as we had her in the water in 2016, we needed to put a cover on her. So we had this 100-foot by 55-foot tent that we erected around the ship itself. And you can also see some of the structural components in this slide. So in order to support this ship while she's out and pull all these frames out, we ran 5 steel I-beams through the ship itself, connecting each deck and then down to the ground. And that's how we supported the ship as we went along and did all the work. You can see here is another good shot of the I-beams themselves in place and some of the planking off and framing removed from the exterior. Here's that tent going up. Of course, we waited till March. We thought that was going to be a good idea. And the day we get going on the framework, a snowstorm blows through. So the first couple days of that tent were, adventurous to say the least. Just a couple more shots of the tent going up and the cover going off. And then as we go through some of the more replacement work, this is one of those sections of the stem I was talking about, one of those 2,000-pound pieces of live oak that went in. And some of the floor work, this is some of those live oak pieces I was talking about. All these floor timbers, which are essentially the center footic that attaches the framework to the keel itself, were all grown live oak pieces. And we replaced every single one of those, all but one, I think, for continuity. And here's some of those shapes that were really desirable. And you can see why having a grown piece is really essential. So once we got all the framework in, we had to fair all that out. The first real year was everything below the waterline, replacing all the framework, all the planking, all the structural components in there. And here's some more of that process of just how we go about it, laying some framework, piece of live oak. As we went forward, we started to move up. So essentially, I broke this up into 6 groups. At this point, we have about 30 shipwrights working on the project. So I had 4 groups of 5 or 6 guys working on different sections all at once. So we had a couple guys up top working on the foredeck, a couple guys doing framing, we had riggers, and everybody going all at once. And here's a couple shots of the half deck and some of the new frames coming in with some of the old work put in. Here's all the knees. We replaced about 180 knees in the entire ship, all brand new live oak with bronze fastening, beautiful pieces. Just a couple more shots of lining off the planking and then hanging the first plank. All the planking itself is white oak, but we imported it from Denmark. We imported about 60,000 board feet of planking straight from Denmark. The Danes have a beautiful selection of white oak. So in the early 1800s, Admiral Nielsen of England came out and wiped out the fleet of Copenhagen to prevent Napoleon from taking it during the Napoleonic Wars. After that, the King of Denmark said, we need to replenish our forests. They grew about 90 million acres of white oak for shipbuilding itself. Flash forward 200 years, they're not really building warships anymore, but all these trees are now coming into age and are now useful. So there's a small company, and if your project is deemed worthy, you're allowed to select from. Coronet at IYRS, behind IYRS there, has the same wood put in it. And we worked with almost the same company to get that imported for us. Beautiful stuff, some of the nicest oak I've ever seen. 30 feet long, 30 inches between the sap, totally clear, unbelievable. And then here's the planking completed. So from this point on, we completely restored the ship, going up, from the keel up, all the planking, all the framework, and it was an incredible project. I wouldn't change anything at all. It was an incredible crew, and it really, came out beautifully. Thank you for having me tonight and going through my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll leave my email below. Feel free for reaching out, and have a good evening. Thanks.